Mom, I'm dying. Help me.
I knew something was wrong the moment Ethan called me that Sunday morning. There was a tremor in his voice I hadn't heard since he was a little boy scared of thunderstorms. "Mom, I need to see you today. It's important." No small talk. No asking about my gardening or the book club I'd mentioned last week. Just urgency. At 67, I'd learned to trust my instincts. 42 years of motherhood and 35 years as a nurse at Naples Community Hospital had taught me to recognize when something wasn't right. But nothing could have prepared me for what my son was about to tell me. I set my coffee mug down on the lanai table, the Florida morning sun already warming my skin through the screened enclosure. My condo overlooked the peaceful waters of Venetian Bay, a retirement dream my late husband Richard and I had worked our entire lives to afford. We'd planned to grow old together here, but a sudden heart attack took him 12 years ago. "I'll make lunch," I told Ethan, trying to keep my voice steady. "Come at noon." I spent the morning cleaning my already spotless condo and preparing Ethan's favorite grouper sandwich, a pointless gesture of motherly comfort that I would soon regret. When the doorbell rang, I opened it to find my son looking gaunt, his usually tanned face pale against his dark blue polo shirt. "Mom," he said, stepping inside and embracing me tightly, too tightly. "I've got something to tell you." We sat at my small dining table, the food untouched between us. Ethan's hands trembled as he spoke the words that would change everything. "I have cancer, Mom. Stage 3 lymphoma." The world seemed to stop. I delivered this news to countless families during my nursing career, but hearing it about my only child was different. The air in my lungs turned to concrete. "The doctors say I need to start treatment right away," he continued, his eyes welling with tears. "They're giving me a 50-50 chance." My nurse's brain kicked in, asking questions about oncologists, treatment plans, and second opinions. Ethan had answers for everything. Dr. Vasquez at Naples Oncology Center, a combination of chemotherapy and immunotherapy, a specialist consultation already scheduled in Miami. "The problem is," he hesitated, looking down at his hands, "my insurance won't cover most of it. The experimental treatment they recommend isn't approved yet." There it was. I knew my son was in financial trouble. His divorce from his ex-wife 3 years ago had left him struggling, despite his job selling luxury condos to wealthy retirees. But I hadn't realized how bad things were. "How much?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. "About 200,000 when it's all said and done." I didn't hesitate. "I'll sell the condo." "Mom, no," he protested, but I cut him off. "This place is too big for me anyway. I can move into something smaller." The condo was worth nearly $1 million in Naples's inflated market. "We're going to beat this." Ethan broke down then, sobbing like I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. I held my son, stroking his hair, making promises I intended to keep. I would do anything to save him. Anything. Within weeks, I had listed my condo and moved into a small rental apartment closer to Ethan's house in Royal Harbor. The sale netted me $875,000, most of which I transferred to a separate account for Ethan's medical expenses. My retirement funds would cover my living expenses, I calculated. It would be tight, but manageable. Meanwhile, Ethan's condition appeared to worsen. He lost weight, and sometimes arrived at my apartment looking exhausted, telling me about the grueling chemo sessions. He'd shaved his head preemptively, which broke my heart. His thick, dark hair had always been his pride. "You don't have to come to the treatments," he told me when I offered. "It's depressing, and Dr. Vasquez says too many people in the room complicate things." I was hurt but understood. Some patients need privacy during their most vulnerable moments. Instead, I cooked meals for him, researched alternative therapies, and joined an online support group for cancer caregivers. Ethan's friends rallied around him too. His coworker Jessica set up a GoFundMe page that raised over $50,000 in just 3 weeks. The local newspaper even ran a story about the community coming together to support him. I was so proud of Naples and so grateful. But 3 months into Ethan's treatment, something changed. It was subtle at first. Inconsistencies in his stories about appointments, mysterious weekend trips he attributed to trying to live life to the fullest while I can. When I offered to organize his medications, he became strangely protective of his pill bottles. "Mom, you've done enough," he insisted. "Let me handle this part." I might have believed him, if not for what happened at the pharmacy. I'd gone to pick up my blood pressure medication when the pharmacist, who knew me from my years at the hospital, asked how Ethan was doing. "Fighting hard," I said, with the practiced smile of a cancer mom. She looked confused. "I'm sorry, I thought he was better. He filled a prescription for allergies last week and seemed fine." My blood ran cold. "You must be mistaken. Ethan gets his medications from the oncology center." "Oh." Her face flushed with embarrassment. "Of course. I must be thinking of someone else." But I knew she wasn't. The seed of doubt had been planted. That night, I called my old colleague Camila Vasquez, who had become one of the top oncologists in Southwest Florida since we worked together in the 90s. "Camila, it's Marlene Winters," I said when she answered. "I need a favor, off the record." "Marlene, it's been ages. What can I do for you?" "My son is being treated for stage 3 lymphoma at Naples Oncology Center. I need to know he's getting proper care." It wasn't entirely a lie. A long pause followed. "Who's the attending physician?" "Dr. Vasquez. Like you, but no relation, I assume." Another pause, longer this time. "Marlene, there's no Dr. Vasquez at Naples Oncology. I know every oncologist in Collier County." My hand tightened around the phone. "Could he be new? Or perhaps a visiting specialist?" "No, honey. We're a small medical community. I would know." I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. There had to be an explanation. Maybe Ethan had the name wrong, or the center wrong. Maybe. But deep down, I knew. A mother knows. The next day, I drove to the Naples Oncology Center during what should have been Ethan's treatment time, according to the schedule he'd shared with me. I sat in the parking lot for 3 hours. He never showed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my small apartment, 35 years of medical training, battling with a mother's desperate hope. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I would investigate my son, methodically and thoroughly, as if he were a case study. If I was wrong, no one would ever need to know about my momentary doubt. But if I was right, I couldn't bear to finish the thought. I started by calling the hospital records department, where I still had friends. No Ethan Winters had been admitted or treated in the oncology ward in the past 6 months. I checked with 3 other hospitals in the area. Nothing. Next, I drove to Ethan's house when I knew he'd be at work. I still had the emergency key he'd given me years ago. What I was about to do felt wrong, a violation of trust. But if there was even a small chance my suspicions were correct, I had to know. Ethan's house was immaculate as always. He'd inherited his father's tidiness. I went straight to his home office and opened his filing cabinet. Medical bills should be there, insurance claims, something. Instead, I found bank statements showing cash withdrawals of thousands of dollars at a time. Credit card statements with charges from high-end restaurants, boutiques, and hotels in Miami, all during times when Ethan had told me he was too sick to leave his house. And then, in the back of his desk drawer, a small bag of white powder and a rolled-up $100 bill. My hands trembled as I closed the drawer. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. My son, my only child, was lying about having cancer. He had taken my life savings, the community's donations, and spent it on cocaine and luxury. I sank into his office chair, a strange calm washing over me. Shock, probably. I should have been crying, screaming, falling apart. Instead, I felt something hardening inside me, a resolve I'd never known I possessed. I carefully replaced everything exactly as I'd found it and left, locking the door behind me. In my car, I sat staring at Ethan's perfect little house with its manicured lawn and royal palm trees. "You've picked the wrong woman to deceive," I whispered to myself, my voice steady and cold. The nurse, the widow, the mother who had sacrificed everything, she was gone now. In her place was someone new, someone who would make sure justice was served. I started the car and drove away, my mind already formulating a plan. Ethan had no idea what was coming. For 3 days, I lived in a state of controlled fury. I went through the motions, grocery shopping, watering my plants, even attending my book club, all while carrying the weight of Ethan's betrayal like hot coal in my chest. I needed evidence, irrefutable proof that would stand up not just in the court of public opinion, but in a real courtroom. Because make no mistake, I intended to see my son face legal consequences. Marlene, you're awfully quiet tonight, my friend Loretta remarked, as our book club discussed the latest bestseller on my small apartment patio. Are you worried about Ethan? The concern in her eyes nearly broke me. Loretta had contributed $5,000 to Ethan's GoFundMe. So had most of our friends. Just tired, I lied, pouring more Chardonnay into her glass. The medication has him stabilized this week. The words tasted like poison on my tongue. How many lies had I unwittingly spread on his behalf? How many people had emptied their pockets for my son's luxury lifestyle and cocaine habit? After my friends left, I sat alone with my laptop, creating a meticulous plan. My nursing career had taught me to document everything, to build cases that could withstand scrutiny. This would be no different. First, I needed professional help. The next morning, I called Victoria Ramirez, an attorney specializing in fraud cases, whose name I'd found after hours of research. Her office was in a sleek building downtown, all glass and polished stone. "Mrs. Winters," she said, gesturing for me to sit in the leather chair across from her desk. "You mentioned a potential fraud involving your son on the phone. I must admit it's unusual for a mother to pursue such a case." "I've never been a conventional mother," I replied, placing a folder on her desk. "And what my son has done isn't just a family matter, it's criminal." I'd prepared a timeline of events, copies of my banking records showing transfers to Ethan, screenshots of the GoFundMe page that had raised over $50,000, and photos I'd surreptitiously taken of the cocaine in his desk. Victoria reviewed the documents, her expression growing more serious with each page. "This is compelling, but not conclusive. We need medical records, or rather proof of their absence, and evidence linking the funds directly to illicit purchases. Tell me what you need, and I'll get it." She studied me for a moment. "Mrs. Winters, pursuing this will likely destroy your relationship with your son permanently. Are you certain this is what you want?" I didn't hesitate. He destroyed our relationship the moment he exploited my love and the community's goodwill. What I want is justice. Victoria nodded, seemingly satisfied with my resolve. "Then we'll need to involve law enforcement. I have a contact at the Naples Police Department who specializes in financial crimes." 2 days later, I sat across from Detective James Calloway in a sparse interview room. His salt-and-pepper hair and weathered face suggested he'd seen plenty of family betrayals in his career, but even he seemed taken aback by my story. "Most fraud victims aren't this methodical," he remarked after I'd outlined everything, "especially when it involves family." "I spent 35 years documenting patient conditions and treatments," I told him. "Old habits die hard." Detective Calloway explained that building a case would take time. They would need subpoenas for bank records, search warrants, and interviews with medical facilities to confirm the absence of treatment. "In the meantime," he advised, "act normally. If Ethan suspects you're onto him, he might destroy evidence or flee." Acting normally meant continuing to play the role of devoted mother to a son battling cancer. It meant listening to Ethan's elaborate lies about non-existent treatments and side effects. It meant watching him shave his head again to maintain the charade, even as my heart hardened further with each deception. The worst moment came when Ethan invited me to dinner at his house to celebrate some good news. He'd prepared grilled salmon and asparagus and opened an expensive bottle of wine. "Dr. Vasquez says the treatment is working," he announced, raising his glass in a toast. "The tumors are shrinking." I clinked my glass against his, smiling. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. You've been so brave." "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom," he said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Selling your condo, moving to this tiny apartment. I'll make it up to you when this is all over, I promise." I studied my son's face as he spoke. The earnest eyes, the grateful smile, all part of a performance so convincing it had fooled everyone. Everyone except me. "There's no need," I assured him. "Your health is all that matters." Later that night, alone in my apartment, I vomited until there was nothing left but bile. Not from the rich meal, but from the realization that my son was a consummate sociopath. The sweet boy who had once brought me dandelions from the yard and cried when his father died was gone, or perhaps had never truly existed. 2 weeks later, Detective Calloway called. "We have enough for a search warrant. We'll execute it tomorrow while your son is at work." "I want to be there," I insisted. Mrs. Winters, that's not standard procedure. Nothing about this case is standard. I know where to look. After some negotiation, Calloway agreed to let me accompany the search team as a person with knowledge of the residents. The next day, I watched as officers methodically went through Ethan's house. In his bathroom cabinet, they found a bottle of syrup of ipecac, used to induce vomiting, and laxatives explaining his apparent weight loss and pallor. In a fireproof safe in his closet, they discovered nearly $30,000 in cash, along with multiple bags of cocaine. But the most damning evidence was on his laptop. Emails between Ethan and a graphic designer friend, creating fake medical letterhead. Screenshots of medical websites he'd used to research lymphoma symptoms to mimic. A spreadsheet tracking his performance, weight loss goals, symptom schedule, and anticipated recovery timeline when the money would presumably run out. And photos. Dozens of photos of Ethan with a young woman at beach resorts, on a yacht, at exclusive Miami nightclubs, all time-stamped during his supposed worst chemo weeks when he'd told me he could barely leave his bed. "Who is she?" I asked Detective Calloway, pointing to the woman. "We'll find out," he promised. They did. Her name was Sophia Chen, a 32-year-old pharmaceutical sales rep Ethan had been dating for 6 months. When questioned, Sophia was horrified to learn that Ethan's cancer was fabricated. She thought his occasional treatments were for a minor condition he didn't like discussing. "He told me his mother was overreacting about his health," she told the detectives, "that you were controlling and insisted on paying for private treatments he didn't really need." Another lie. Another knife in my heart. With the evidence mounting, Victoria advised me to take the next step, freezing Ethan's assets and recovering what funds we could. "The criminal case will take time," she explained, "but we can file for civil asset forfeiture immediately based on the evidence of fraud." I also needed to protect myself. If word got out that Ethan had been faking his illness, the community that had so generously supported him might wonder if I had been complicit. I needed to get ahead of the story. That's where Eleanor Wells came in. A respected investigative journalist for the Naples Daily News, Eleanor had built her career exposing corruption in local government and businesses. Victoria arranged a meeting at her office. "Mrs. Winters," Eleanor said after hearing my story, "I have to admit this is one of the most disturbing cases of fraud I've encountered. You're sure you want to go public with this? It will be extremely painful for you." "More painful than learning my son faked cancer to steal my life savings?" I asked. "I doubt it." We agreed that Eleanor would work closely with Detective Calloway, publishing nothing until arrests were made, but building a comprehensive exposé that would run the day Ethan was taken into custody. Everything was in place. The police had their evidence. Victoria had prepared the civil asset paperwork. Eleanor had her story ready. All we needed was the right moment to spring the trap. It came sooner than expected. Detective Calloway called me on a Wednesday afternoon. "Mrs. Winters, we've been monitoring your son's accounts as authorized by the warrant. There's been a large cash withdrawal, and he's booked a one-way ticket to Cancun for tomorrow morning. We need to move now." My heart raced. "He's running." "Appears so. We're assembling a team to make the arrest at his home this evening. Given the circumstances, I thought you should know." I thanked him and hung up, my hands trembling slightly. After weeks of investigation, it was finally happening, but something felt unfinished. I needed to see Ethan's face when he realized his mother had been the architect of his downfall. I called him immediately. "Ethan, I just made some of your favorite key lime pie. Can you come over for dessert tonight?" "Sorry, Mom," he said, sounding distracted. "I'm packing for a business trip." "Rain check?" "It won't keep until you get back," I insisted, injecting disappointment into my voice. "Just a quick visit? I hardly see you these days with your treatments and work." He sighed. "Fine, I'll stop by around 7. I texted Detective Calloway with the update. He wasn't happy about my improvisation, but agreed to have officers waiting nearby. At 6:55 p.m., I placed the key lime pie, which I had indeed baked that afternoon, on the coffee table alongside 2 plates. At exactly 7, Ethan knocked on my door. He looked healthier than he had in months, having apparently abandoned the pretense of illness now that he was planning to flee. His cheeks had color, and he'd even let his hair start growing back, a light stubble across his scalp. "Hey, Mom," he said, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek before glancing at his watch. "I can only stay a few minutes." That's all we'll need, I replied, gesturing for him to sit. Instead of joining him on the couch, I remained standing, something cold and resolute in my posture. Ethan noticed immediately. Is everything okay? No, Ethan. Everything is not okay. I reached into my pocket and removed the small bag of cocaine I'd photographed in his desk drawer weeks earlier. I'd asked Detective Calloway to let me keep it as evidence. Would you like to explain this? The color drained from his face. Where did you... Your desk drawer. Along with bank statements showing where my money really went. And your friend Dr. Vasquez? She doesn't exist. For a moment, Ethan seemed frozen. Then his expression shifted, a calculating look replacing the shock. Mom, I can explain. Save it for the police, I cut him off. They're on their way now. He stood abruptly, knocking over a glass on the coffee table. You called the cops on me? Your own son? My son would never steal from his mother, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. My son would never fake a life-threatening illness for money. I don't know who you are anymore, Ethan. He lunged for the door, but as he yanked it open, 2 police officers stood waiting in the hallway, Detective Calloway behind them. Ethan Winters, one officer announced. You're under arrest for fraud, theft by deception, possession of controlled substances. As they recited the charges, Ethan looked back at me with pure hatred in his eyes. You'll regret this, he spat. Your own flesh and blood. I met his gaze without flinching. I already regret every sacrifice I ever made for you. They led him away in handcuffs, and I closed the door on the sound of his protests echoing down the hallway. I returned to the couch and cut myself a slice of key lime pie, my hands perfectly steady as I lifted the first bite to my lips. The trap had sprung. But this was only the beginning of Ethan's reckoning, and my rebirth. The morning after Ethan's arrest, I woke to my phone buzzing incessantly. Eleanor's exposé had hit the Naples Daily News with the headline, Local Man Fakes Cancer, Defrauds Mother and Community of Thousands. Accompanying the article was a photo of Ethan being led away in handcuffs, and another of me standing resolute on my apartment balcony, a picture Eleanor had taken days earlier in preparation. The story was spreading like wildfire. Local TV stations were requesting interviews. Ethan's GoFundMe donors were expressing outrage in the comments section. My book club friends were calling and texting, their messages a mix of shock and sympathy. I ignored them all and made myself a cup of coffee. There would be time for statements and appearances, but first, I needed to see Victoria about the next phase of my plan. The prosecutor is charging him with multiple felonies, Victoria confirmed when I arrived at her office. Fraud, grand theft, possession of controlled substances. With the evidence we've collected, he's looking at significant prison time. And my money? I asked, because practicality had become my armor. We've already frozen his accounts. The judge granted our emergency petition based on the clear evidence of fraud. We've recovered about $400,000 so far, less than half of what I'd given him, but it was something. The rest had gone up Ethan's nose or been spent on luxuries I'd never see. What about the house? I asked. Ethan's Royal Harbor home was worth well over $1 million. That's more complicated, Victoria admitted. It's in his name, but he had a legitimate mortgage before all this started. We're arguing that recent payments came from fraudulently obtained funds, which gives us leverage. The court has placed a lien preventing him from selling. I nodded. And the GoFundMe money? The company has frozen the account. They'll cooperate fully with restitution orders. It was all proceeding exactly as I'd planned, and yet I felt hollow. Not regretful, never that, but empty, as if I'd poured everything into this revenge and now had nothing left. Victoria seemed to sense my mood. Marlene, you've done something extraordinary. Most victims of fraud, especially familial fraud, never see justice. You should be proud. I'll be proud when it's finished, I replied. The next week passed in a blur of legal meetings, police interviews, and carefully controlled press interactions. Eleanor's follow-up articles painted me as a courageous whistleblower rather than a vengeful mother, exactly the narrative I needed. Ethan, meanwhile, had been denied bail as a flight risk. His expensive defense attorney, paid for by funds the court hadn't yet frozen, was already floating the idea that his actions stemmed from untreated mental health issues and addiction. I scoffed when I read this in the paper. The only mental illness my son suffered from was pathological selfishness. 10 days after the arrest, I received an unexpected visitor at my apartment. Sophia Chen, Ethan's girlfriend. She looked younger in person than in the photos, her face drawn with stress. "Mrs. Winters," she said when I opened the door. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I needed to speak with you directly." I hesitated, then invited her in. My apartment was small but tidy, with a few of my favorite pieces from the condo arranged carefully to make it feel like home. "I want you to know I had no idea about Ethan's lies," she said, perching nervously on my couch. "When we met, he told me he had a minor blood disorder that required occasional treatments, nothing serious." "Did he ask you for money?" I questioned. She shook her head. "No, actually. He was always paying for everything, expensive dinners, weekend trips. Now I understand where that money came from." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm so ashamed. I should have realized something wasn't right." Looking at her distress, I felt a surprising kinship. We were both victims of Ethan's elaborate deceptions. "You have nothing to be ashamed of," I told her. "Ethan fooled everyone. He was raised by a nurse and still managed to convince me he had cancer." She wiped her eyes. "The detectives asked me to testify about the trips we took during times he claimed to be bedridden with chemo side effects." "Will you?" Sophia straightened her shoulders. "Yes. What he did to you, to everyone who donated, it's unforgivable." After she left, I sat alone with my thoughts. The criminal case was proceeding, the civil recovery was underway, and public opinion had solidified against Ethan. But something was still missing. The answer came in the form of a call from Detective Calloway the next morning. "Mrs. Winters, we found something interesting while executing another search warrant at your son's office. A safety deposit box key." The contents of the box proved to be the final nail in Ethan's coffin. $120,000 in cash, fake IDs under 2 different names, and documents for offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. It was clear he'd been planning his escape for months. With this new evidence, even Ethan's slick attorney couldn't spin a sympathetic narrative. The prosecutor offered a plea deal: 10 years in prison, full restitution, and no possibility of early release. To my surprise, Ethan rejected it. He wanted a trial. One last narcissistic performance. "He thinks he can charm a jury," Victoria explained during our next meeting. "Men like your son often believe they're smarter than everyone else." "He's not," I said simply. The trial date was set for 3 months later. In the meantime, I had decisions to make about my future. The partial recovery of my funds had given me options, but not enough to buy back my condo or fully restore my retirement. Loretta suggested I move into her condo building, where a smaller unit was available. "We could be neighbors," she said over lunch at her place. "The community here has been so supportive since the news broke." It was tempting. After weeks of isolation and legal battles, the idea of friendly neighbors and Gulf views had its appeal. But something held me back. "I need a complete change," I realized aloud. "As long as I'm in Naples, I'll always be the woman whose son faked cancer." Loretta nodded in understanding. "Where would you go?" The answer came to me with surprising clarity. "Savannah. I visited once with Richard years ago. We always talked about retiring there instead of Florida, but his job kept us here." "Georgia," Loretta mused. "It suits you somehow, all that history and resilience." I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. "I'll wait until after the trial, then make a fresh start." The trial itself was a 3-day spectacle that dominated local news. I testified on the first day, recounting every detail of Ethan's deception with clinical precision. I never once looked at him sitting at the defense table, though I could feel his eyes on me throughout. Sophia testified next, followed by medical professionals confirming Ethan had never received cancer treatment. Detective Calloway presented the physical evidence, including the damning contents of the safety deposit box. By the time the prosecution rested its case, even Ethan seemed to recognize the inevitability of his conviction. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with a guilty verdict on all counts. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, did not hide her disgust during sentencing. "Mr. Winters," she declared, "you have committed a fraud that is breathtaking in its cruelty and calculation. You exploited your mother's love, the community's compassion, and the sympathy reserved for those truly suffering from a terrible disease. In my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such calculated depravity. She sentenced him to 15 years in prison, 5 more than the original plea offer, with no possibility of parole for at least 12 years. Full restitution was ordered, and any future earnings would be garnished until I was repaid in full. As the bailiffs led Ethan away, he finally looked directly at me. In his eyes, I saw not remorse, but something darker, a hatred that might have chilled me once. Now I met his gaze evenly, unmoved. He was no longer my son in any way that mattered. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for a statement. With Eleanor at my side, I approached the microphones. "Justice has been served today," I said, my voice steady. "Not just for me, but for everyone who believed in my son's lies. I hope this case serves as a warning that deception on this scale, exploiting the worst fears and deepest compassion of others, will not be tolerated." A reporter called out, "Will you ever forgive your son?" I considered the question carefully before answering. Forgiveness is not in my heart right now, nor do I believe it should be. Some betrayals run too deep for reconciliation. What I will do is rebuild my life, stronger and wiser than before. With that, I turned and walked away from the cameras, from the courthouse, and from the shattered remains of my old life. Ahead lay Savannah, with its moss-draped oaks and riverfront promise. Ahead lay whatever future I chose to create for myself, without the burden of a son who had proven himself unworthy of a mother's love. Savannah embraced me like an old friend. My cottage near Forsyth Park, purchased with what remained of my recovered funds, became my sanctuary. White wisteria draped the small porch where I now take my morning coffee, the Spanish moss in the oak trees swaying gently in the Georgia breeze. It's been 2 years since Ethan's sentencing. The civil courts eventually forced the sale of his house, recovering another $400,000 for me after the mortgage was settled. Combined with my savings and a part-time position I took at a nursing school, I've rebuilt a modest but comfortable life. Sometimes, walking through the historic squares, I catch myself smiling, a genuine smile that reaches my eyes. The kind I thought I might never feel again after the betrayal. I've made new friends here. No one knows my story unless I choose to share it. I'm just Marlene, the retired nurse from Florida who teaches part-time and makes excellent lemon squares for neighborhood gatherings. Ethan writes me letters from prison. I return them unopened. Victoria forwards me updates on his appeals, all denied, and his attempts to secure early release, all rejected. The justice system, which so often fails victims, has stood firm in his case. Loretta visits twice a year. During her last trip, she brought news that Sophia had married and moved to California. Good for her, escaping Ethan's shadow as I have. My story has faded from the Naples news cycle, replaced by newer scandals and tragedies. But occasionally, I receive messages from other parents who have experienced similar betrayals, seeking advice or simply connection with someone who understands. I answer each one. This morning, I submitted the final payment on my cottage. Full ownership, free and clear. As I signed the documents, I realized something profound. Ethan took almost everything from me, but in doing so, he inadvertently gave me something precious: the freedom to discover my own strength. I am 69 years old, and for the first time in my life, I answer to no one but myself. If you've been through something similar, know you're not alone. Subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories of survival and justice. And remember, it's never too late to reclaim your power. Hit that notification bell to join our community of survivors.